Hey, everybody. Good morning if you're on the West Coast, and good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. My name is Jake Milstein. I am the host for today's event, the urgent panel discussion about the data theft from LinkedIn and Facebook. And I don't know, I know some folks have attended some of our panel discussions before. This one's going to be a little bit different because this isn't usually when we do these, it's about an urgent vulnerability. This one's a little different because of the nature of it. It's not really a hack or of traditional vulnerabilities. So we'll talk through that. But thank you for being here. We try to keep our events lively. We promise they're never boring. If you get bored, let us know and we'll make Mike talk louder.
Funny.
Yeah, good. Also, on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat. If at any point you have questions or want to say something, go ahead and put it in the chat. Looks like people are coming into the room here, but we'll get started. So our presenters today, Mike Hamilton, who is co-founder of CI and former CISO of the city of Seattle, Alith Dennis, intelligence and social engineering specialist. And then Jean-Luc Peck might join us later. He's in charge of incident response and got a call this morning and is on an IR call right now. So he texted right before and said, I might join a little late. So he might join a little late. He needs to help out an organization dealing with something that we're trying to help folks avoid, of course. So we're here today to talk about what happened at LinkedIn and Facebook. So here are the facts. Large volumes of user information from Facebook and LinkedIn were nearly simultaneously put up for sale. The information is not from a current data breach, but has been aggregated from previous disclosures and scraped from the sites themselves. In total, it's more than 800 million records that include enough information to perpetrate fraud directed at users, business email compromise, or craft bait useful for gaining access to corporate networks. On Facebook, data was scraped from Facebook profiles by malicious actors using Facebook's contact importer prior to 2019, September. Facebook now prevents malicious actors from using software to imitate their app and upload a large set of phone numbers to see which ones matched Facebook's user phone numbers. Malicious actors were able to query a set of user profiles and obtain a limited set of information about those users included in their public profiles. And the information did not include financial information, health information, or passwords. And then on the LinkedIn side, scraped data is actually an aggregation of data from a number of websites and companies. The information is not from a current data breach. Data has been aggregated from previous disclosures and scraped from those sites themselves, not from LinkedIn. And then data includes account IDs, full names, email addresses, phone numbers, workplace information, genders, and links to other social media accounts. So we're going to get to the panel. We'll get back to some more slides, but let me just jump quickly to Mike. So Mike, why this isn't a breach. One, so why isn't this a breach?
Well, because Facebook had an API so that, people that were paying them to use their API presumably could pull the data off and do things like, sell it or, aggregate it for other reasons, right? The famous Cambridge Analytica, that was a whole lot of Facebook data that was able to, after an analysis, target people based on whatever pathology would lead them to believe the message that you hung in front of them, right? And so apparently that was abused. Facebook has stopped it. But with information out this morning, I want to make one correction. The Facebook data is being given away for free. LinkedIn data is being sold, Clubhouse data being sold. And, one thing we were talking about before we got started this morning that, standalone, these kind of have, maybe limited utility, although we'll talk about a lot of things you can do if you have this kind of data. But in aggregate, in combination, there's probably a lot of there.
And Alith, when you get hired by companies to try to get in, this is the kind of data you look for. What, from your perspective, why is this a big deal?
Well, repositories of data like this make it incredibly easy for attackers to set up what we like to term as spray and pray campaigns. So you've got a large volume of data, a large volume of contacts and potential targets, and you can leverage repositories of breach data to cut down on a lot of the reconnaissance time that's needed to gather this type of information. So in the time that you would have usually been able to target maybe 1 to 2 people, you can hit, hundreds of thousands, and reliably reach someone because the data is linked to an account that exists and people who are actively on these networks.
And this might be a silly question, but let's say let's take that to the next level. If I am an attacker, give me an example. Like, what would I do? I would, if I go by the LinkedIn data, what can I do with it?
There are other applications and programs that you can use to set up phishing email campaigns on a large scale, in large volume. And so you would essentially import those contact details into those platforms. And I won't name any of them here, but you can import all those details in there and essentially set up an automated phishing attack. And you can set it up with many different email templates, styles of email. And if you know for sure that this data is from Facebook, then your immediate tendency would be to choose a template that is related to Facebook. Like, hey, this person on Facebook tagged you in a picture. Go look at the picture and verify this is you. And that's a perfect phishing email for somebody who we know is on Facebook. And having this this information is going to make that phishing email seem more genuine to that person, because we've established that this is them, this is their information. We include a few details about them from the breach data that we have in the email template. And then we can contact the email address that they have associated with their Facebook. So this would seem like a very real email to somebody who received this phishing email, as opposed to just guessing whether or not somebody uses a particular email address on a certain network.
Yeah, I'd say writ large, it allows you to personalize bait.
Right, there you go.
And I think there's 2 things that are going to be in scope here. And one is how this can be used against people personally. So, for example, I think it was reported this morning, in total, the state of Washington, during the last phase of the distribution of relief checks, lost in excess of $600 million, and some people are saying up to $1 billion in that little episode. So clearly that, things like unemployment insurance fraud, the housing market is hot right now. So if you're a title company, the escrow and wire fraud that has accompanied a lot of home sales, things like that. And I think you have some specific detail on that, Elite, that you can talk about in a second. But the other thing is getting into corporations and gaining access to networks, right? Because of the willy-nilly way that people, make information public, or when they didn't think it was going to be public, and people making mistakes like, using your work email address to identify you as the contact information for Facebook, for LinkedIn, for whatever. All those are in scope. So, what you talked about there, being able to personalize bait, I think there's a difference between going after the individuals, which would require, as you say, some action at scale, right? Because you're going to have to do it with a lot. Or surgically targeting corporations and using this for data to mine, right, for the intel that allows you the easiest route inside a network so that you can do something like, extort them, steal from them, things like that. Both those things I think are coming up. You want to talk about how the real estate fraud works, because this is kind of interesting.
Absolutely. So real quick point before I forget. When you're talking about using your company email address on LinkedIn, if I can verify through even one person what the naming convention is that is used to create company emails. So now I know it's, first name at company.com. I can go into the company page for that company, and then I can scrape all of their employees, and then I have a script that puts them into that naming convention. And now I've got a whole list of emails for that one company, and I can target that entire company using what will most likely be all of their valid email addresses. So that's one thing I wanted to mention really quick. And then with regards to the escrow and wire fraud situation, as you mentioned, the real estate market is nuts. Title companies are completely inundated with escrows, and everybody wants to close on their sales as quickly as possible. So most wire fraud fish will take advantage of the fact that escrow assistants and escrow officers are extremely busy and they're handling many transactions at once. And they'll usually send a wiring request that changes the instructions from the escrow instructions and just hope that nobody notices or validates the request so that they can essentially siphon that money and funnel it away from the sellers on the transaction and then essentially steal the money from the escrow transaction. And that can be really, really dangerous if they have information and specifics about the sellers and the buyers and folks that are actually a party to that escrow.
Okay, so all right, so you both know. I think folks in the audience know. I run marketing for CI, and before that, I ran newsrooms. One of the things that you can do in marketing is, if I want to use Facebook or LinkedIn to target, say, all of the IT directors of cities in Washington, or cities around the country, I can get that. I can do that. I can pay for that, right? That's how LinkedIn and Facebook make money. So why is this different?
Well, first of all, because they didn't get paid for it.
I think this was a point that Mike Simon brought up last week when we were talking about this originally, was that really the only difference between this data being taken and this data being sold is that Facebook didn't get paid for the information. There are absolutely businesses like marketers and scammers that are using tools within these platforms to purchase the ability to get this data one way or another.
Yeah, I think the interesting question is, why is it hitting the market now? What is special about now that makes data from 2019? And by the way, we go, oh, it's old data, right? You don't change your phone number that often. I mean, there's a lot of characteristics in there that are pretty immutable, on timescales that are appropriate here. So, why release these things now? And I think it's because now there are buyers for this, and the sellers know that someone is going to mount a campaign here, and they've been seeking data, and so now data is being made available. There are other events, I think, and we talked about unemployment insurance and the fraud that's been perpetrated there. I think that is a diminishing threat with the rise in employment that we're having right now. So it doesn't make as much sense to me that data would be weaponized for specifically unemployment impersonation fraud, right? And I think it's got more to do with things like the housing market and the just the rise of ransomware, extortion, more broadly, so I think this point about, escrow and wire fraud is one that we really need to pay attention to, because the housing market is on fire right now. And these events in the news, when there's an opportunity created, the criminals are not stupid. They're going to go in that direction. And, there's always going to be, trying to get you to give up a password so I can walk into your network and ransomware you and extort you and do all that stuff, but, we got to ask, what are the events that precipitated stuff coming online for sale right now? And I will, I think it's important to make the difference between this Facebook, LinkedIn, Clubhouse data. Clubhouse was an actual hack. That wasn't siphoning off, using scraping APIs and things like that. And then there's a couple more, Gab and Parler. Those were hacks. And so those fall into a different category. Those were done to expose and embarrass people and not monetize data, to my knowledge. Right?
Right, with purpose.
Oh, hey, there we go. Look at that.
There, hey, look, we have a slide for that.
Hey,
Sorry
we have a
about
slide.
sorry about the crazy video thing that happened there for a second.
Yeah, but yeah, the Escher video, yeah.
We were transported to another dimension.
Bad webinaring, Jake. Bad webinaring. No, but so go through the slide, because I think some folks have this in mind of how is this different than Clubhouse and Parler and Gab.
I think Parler and Gab specifically, these were targeted to try to shine a light on the individuals who were using these networks. Specifically, that was the purpose, to, like Mike said, embarrass them and expose them. With Clubhouse, I'm not sure exactly the motivation there, other than the fact that it's the newest, hottest thing. And I think that there's some exclusionary qualities to it, since it's invite only and not everybody gets to go play there. So there may be some elements of the targeting there that are related to the exclusionary side of Clubhouse.
Interestingly, as somebody who, in the marketing community, marketing loves to be at the forefront of all of these things. And so for Clubhouse, you're encouraged to use your work email. So that might be part of it, as opposed to your Gmail or your Hotmail.
And I mean, to be clear, I have a profile on all of these only because I am one of those people that likes to adopt all the social medias as early as possible so I can learn how to use them to my advantage when I'm doing OSINT and different types of reconnaissance. And we talked a little bit about emails, but all of this information can also be used to conduct vishing or phishing over the phone. And most people think, oh, well, this is all pretty innocuous information. What is somebody going to actually gain using this information? Just because you know my name or my Twitter handle doesn't mean that you're going to be able to access any, sensitive information or sensitive systems. But the way that you need to look at this is most hacks are progressive in nature. It's not just one thing that happens and we're in. There's a series of steps that happen, and some of those could be, phishing emails. Some of those are vishing or over the phone phishing. Some of those are in person or physical type interactions with humans to gain information face to face or access to places face to face. And having some of these information or informational data points in your back pocket can help you wiggle your way out of objections and challenges. If somebody is like, well, wait a second, who did you say you are? Oh, I know so-and-so. And you've got, personal information about that person, it can really be helpful to kind of put that person's suspicions at ease.
Yeah. One thing too that I think, maybe another knock on that people can watch out for, and I say this because it's happened to us, and specifically to some of our consultants, that worked on maybe a little more high profile things. We have individuals trying to initiate relationships all the time, specifically on LinkedIn, based on organization, role, things that have been communicated publicly, things that we say publicly. And it gets real weird real quick. And so, because all the LinkedIn data are out there right now, I'd have special eyes on connection requests. Because this is the way, somebody's going to initiate a relationship. They're going to, drill in, create trust, et cetera, et cetera. It's a technique that the North Koreans have been using to create relationships with security researchers. So basically they can own them, right? I mean, they'll send them a link to hey, let's do this research project. And it's the link is more than that. So I'd watch out for, the kind of connection requests you're going to get. And at least for a while, do what I do. If you don't recognize somebody, into the can. That's it. That's it.
Well, so, Elise, you put together a couple of slides about how to prevent future scrapes. Before we get there, what Mike's point earlier is true. You probably haven't changed your cell phone number in a long time. So if it's already out there, it's already out there. But, since this is going to keep happening in the future, IT directors, IT managers, CIOs, CISOs should be talking to their organizations at this point, to the employees about what to do. Elise, let me pull up these slides without taking us into hyperspace this time. But go ahead.
So when we're talking about preventing your data from being scraped, I think the most important element is to ensure that you are fully aware of how Facebook stores and shares your information. Figure out what's public and what is private, first of all. It's good for everyone to make sure that their settings align with the way that they want to be sharing information publicly. And in this case, for specifically related to this most recent scraping of data, if you had updated your how people find and contact you, you would have been eliminated from that contact searching tool that Facebook has since disabled. We also recommend people do regular privacy checkups, make sure that your settings are in the right place, set up two-factor authentication to prevent people from accessing your account should they get access to your password in the future. But limiting what data you choose to share on Facebook is useful in preventing it from being scraped. If you never share it with Facebook, there's no way that it can be found or scraped or leaked in the future. I would also recommend that if you want to separate your personal and company emails from your social media, create another email address that you only use for things like social media and signing up for webinars and stuff like that. And it'll help to create a division of stuff that is sensitive and stuff that is all just social media garbage.
Yeah, and let me just
let
let me add
go
something
ahead.
to that real quick, because people that use their work address as contact for Facebook and LinkedIn are just exacerbating the problem. The bonus there is, all this phishing junk that comes into a work address. If you told Facebook that your contact address is at Gmail, you will always know when you get a message from Facebook at work that it is fake.
Right.
That's the
Yes.
bonus right there. I mean, it just instant rate. Hey, this can't possibly be real. Into the can, right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful point. And it's going to help you filter out things that are fishy in nature, because you'll know for certain that you never signed up for that platform using that address. And similarly with phone numbers, I mean, your phone number is probably all over the internet in a million different places. There's no way to really protect that unless you have a different phone number you want to use for signing up for the majority of stuff in your life, which is not very practical. So I would just make sure that you are not allowing people to authenticate with you using information that you know you've shared publicly. So make people go the extra mile to validate their requests with you. And if you're ever in doubt, especially over the phone, tell the person that you'd like to hang up for whatever reason. Say, I'm doing something else right now. I'd like to give you a call back. I'll call back the main company number. What's your extension? Or something like that to force them to either allow you to do that or to reveal themselves. Because the second that they try to escalate the timeline or put pressure on you and say that that's not okay, they're likely a scammer. Because there's no scenario where that would happen in real life.
Yeah, and I love William's suggestion here in the chat. Use a Google Voice number
Mm-hmm.
as your phone number. That's great.
Google Voice is not a valid number that you can use on LinkedIn.
Right.
Believe me, I've tried. But you can absolutely use alternate phone numbers, and there are ways that you can, make it so that you're at least not using your company desk phone number. Use something that you can kind of create that separation of work and personal.
Get a magic jack.
It's funny. Exactly. Somebody else I was talking to, pays $5 a year for a phone number so they can use it for that kind of thing. So Elise, let's also talk about preventing future scrapes on LinkedIn. And after you do, the question that I want to get to, so go through this, and then the question I want to get to is, if I'm the CEO, the CIO, the IT manager for a company, how do I actually enforce this? Like, this is a hard thing, but let's go through this and then.
Sure, of course. So essentially, this is very similar to how to prevent the future scrapes on Facebook. We're going to make sure that we understand what elements of our profile are public and private, and you can hide a lot of your LinkedIn contact from people who are not connected with you. Review your settings. Social media platforms are updated and changed on a regular basis, and they don't always notify you. So just log in and do kind of a privacy checkup on all of your social media profiles on a regular cadence. Setting up two-factor authentication on LinkedIn, also a great idea. And then again, limiting what you share with social media networks in general is the best way to protect your information. Not including your birthday, not including other, personal identifying information in your profiles on these sites can be helpful. For LinkedIn specifically, especially if you're not actively looking for a job right now, remove all of your prior work experience, remove all of the stuff that you have under your responsibilities, systems, applications, specific skills that you have that would reveal what your company does, what your company uses, and how your company is structured, remove that information, because it's not going to be anything but useful to scammers and bad actors. It's nice for us to be able to brag about what we do and how successful we are and all the skills we have, but sometimes we need to measure the risk with sharing that type of information.
And so, all right, so let's pretend that I'm let's pretend I'm an employee. And the last person to comment here was Dirk. So let's pretend I'm Dirk's employee. And somebody comes to me, or Dirk comes to me and says, "Hey, on your LinkedIn profile, I want you to take off all of your previous work experience because the risk is not worth the reward." I'm going to
That's going to
say,
be tough.
right. I mean, that's a tough conversation. What do
Yeah.
you, how do you have that conversation? And is it a realistic request?
So, of course, an employee's personal social media accounts are their, digital asset. That's their property. So while you can have a social media policy within your organization that restricts the use of, logging into those sites from company computers and, forces folks to do it on their personal devices and stuff like that, there's no real way that we can completely eliminate the risk related to these types of sites. I think the best way to tackle it is just making sure that employees are receiving regular security awareness training, that they understand the risks, and if they're willing to accept those risks, that they understand that they may be responsible for dealing with the consequences. So it's tough because you can't tell people what to do in their own house, essentially. But most employees that I've spoken to over the course of the last year, the initial security awareness training that we did with those organizations, precisely 0 people in the room had heard the term social engineering prior to me walking in the building. And so this is still very much something that needs to be discussed, trained, and explained fully to employees who may or may not be aware that they're putting themselves at risk, not just the company's information at risk, but their own personal information. And I feel that if you emphasize the personal risk to employees, they'll be more likely to adopt these types of practices and then carry that forward into their life at work as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Dirk, I didn't mean to pick on you, but you also had something, a good question in there, which is, if I delete my Facebook profile, does it truly get deleted, or does it just become a shadow profile? Mike, you answered, unless you completely delete and disown Facebook, they keep your info,
Mm-hmm.
which I think
I can tell you how I know that.
Well, tell me, because I think I'll also say, since what we're talking about today involves Facebook information from 2019, if you delete your Facebook profile today, that doesn't mean that people can't get your information previously. But why don't you tell us how you know that?
So, well, I know because I terminated my Facebook account, but I kept Facebook Messenger for one reason only, and it's because the other Dippy band members in my band communicate that way. And so because of this, I've done my own research, and I know that Facebook still thinks I'm going to reactivate my account, and you need to completely obliterate all components of it before they will actually delete your stuff. And so, and interestingly, so like, I'm using Facebook Messenger to talk to my Dippy band members. Facebook is slurping up all kinds of activity completely peripheral to that. So, it's insidious. It's a self-inflicted wound, and yet we do it. Going back to, how can an organization enforce these kinds of things? So, number one, I think to Elise's point, you can't enforce what they put in that profile there, unless you've got a really, really interesting employment agreement. But Steve makes a suggestion that on your LinkedIn profile, for example, you put your work history, but not your current employer. That's actually a pretty good idea. That's a reasonably good idea. I don't think it would be that hard to find out who your current employer is.
Jake's
And
gonna hate that idea.
It's an
for our
example
marketing
of what,
purposes.
the much maligned security through obscurity,
Mhm.
but it's better than nothing. And I think too, the issue of using your work address as your social media contact, that one is easy to police, right? So, messages that are coming in that appear to come from Facebook or do come from Facebook, those are easily trapped, for the most part. And, if it really comes from Facebook, then that user really did use their email contact. And so I think that one can be policed.
The city that I live in is on precisely 0 of my social media profiles. None of the cities that are listed on my profiles are actually where I live.
Mhm.
And so that's actually helpful because Facebook will use targeted ads to say things like, everybody in this town is doing this, you should too. And so you can kind of weed out the advertising and the scammy messages because they are only pulling from that erroneous information.
Yeah.
So if it's, that's some of the ways that you can kind of avoid that stuff is by simply feeding it bad intel.
Exactly. My username is.
Wait. So Elise, you started this whole thing by going in the chat and asking people where they were.
That's because I'm a social engineer.
Yeah, my username is Seattle MKH, and I live in Albuquerque, right? So there's an example.
Right, of course. Right? Yep, it's a great example. I actually had a friend at a conference who I just met that same day introduce me as his ex-wife to his boss with my husband standing right next to me. And I just rolled with it. So we can roll with anything here. Let's go. Yeah, deleting Facebook. I wanted to circle back to that because a lot of people don't understand that Messenger, Instagram, and WhatsApp are all Facebook-owned assets. And so they all talk to each other and they work together. And any information that you shared with Facebook in the past lives somewhere forever. I'm certain of that. And Facebook Messenger specifically has controls that not only allow you to do cool things like have video calls with your friends, but if you enable that microphone and you allow it to remain on your device, you're actually allowing it to listen to your conversations on a daily basis. So if you've ever noticed that, you can complain about not having the best litter box for your cat, and the very same afternoon you're seeing ads for litter boxes for cats in your Facebook feed, that's because it's literally listening to your conversations for keywords. So
okay,
be very
I wouldn't bash marketing with Jake being the MC of this particular thing here, but yeah,
I'm not bashing. People just need to be aware that thing is listening to you. So there's no real way to get away from these sites using your information. And I know that it's a marketer's dream to have access to all of that amazing intelligence. So, just be mindful of that. There's no way to completely get off the grid in today's society. And so recognizing these types of attacks and what these emails look like, what these phone calls sound like, that's where I think we're going to have the most success.
Yeah. And so, and by the way, for folks, actually, Ben asks a question here, which we should get to. I do want to point out for folks who don't come to a lot of our events, yes, I run marketing. Yes, I run marketing at a cybersecurity company. And yes, we have all sorts of great internal conversations about, tracking visitors to our website and what should we do and what's the right thing to do. And Elise and Mike and I, we go round and round on that pretty well. So Ben says, wait, say that again. Under what circumstances can the Facebook app listen to your audio conversations? I will say Amazon says that it doesn't do this. I don't know whether Facebook says it doesn't do it, but I think we've all noticed things pop up. So Elise, dig into that a little more for Ben.
You're going to have to review Facebook's terms of service for the specifics, which nobody ever does. But essentially, if you give Facebook applications permission to access your microphone and to access your camera, that is lasting. So if you have it on, it's on always. And there are controls in specific smartphones now that are supposed to alert you to when these applications are making use of your camera. But I don't know that there's anything to alert you to when it's making use of your microphone and listening. So it sounds a little bit conspiracy theorist, and I'm fully aware that that's how this sounds, but it is proven, and it's just something to be aware of. The best way to take care of this is not to have the application on your phone. The second best way to take care of this is to not give that application permissions to use things like your camera, your microphone, or access your camera roll. You can, in some devices, limit the visibility into your camera roll to specific images. That's a good way to reduce what photos the applications have access to. But I would just turn off the microphone and the camera when you're not specifically using it. And you can do that in your application specific settings.
And Milton says, so LinkedIn is not a safe place. So what benefit is it remaining on LinkedIn with false identity or location?
Yeah, none on LinkedIn. If you're using it, for business networking, right? I mean, you have to have factual information there, but I think, per the conversation here, you can limit that and limit the exposure to your organization based on what you have disclosed. Remember, you want to do that personally for your networking, but exposing too much and putting your organization at risk, can have the effect of putting you on the job market.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear here. For a lot of folks, you cannot just not be on LinkedIn.
That's right.
It's part of business. Like what Elise is saying here is great. There is no way I, as the head of marketing, would allow Elise just to not be on LinkedIn. Like that's not a thing.
And recruiters and talent organizations, I mean, that's their bread and butter. That's where they get a lot of their market intelligence, actually, is pulling how many employees work in this role, in this job, at this company. So while I don't think we can avoid these sites 100%, I think the benefit to remaining on LinkedIn is A, marketing, B, talent sourcing, and C, connecting people with jobs. I mean, those people who are open to work right now on LinkedIn, actively seeking employment, that's absolutely a benefit to them to remain there and to keep doing that. All I'm saying is be mindful of the types of information that you're sharing. Don't allow attackers to authenticate with you using the information that you've shared publicly. So if I talk about the fact that I love chickens and raise chickens and chickens are my everything, and I find that somebody's trying very hard to build rapport with me on that fact, I need to be a little bit cautious and keep them at arm's length until I can verify that they are who they say they are.
Oh, Elise, there is something about one of our founders that you don't know about chickens that at some point I'll tell you.
Oh, no.
I will say I'm getting text messages in here from sales folks that are on the call saying, nobody in sales is going to follow these recommendations for LinkedIn.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And they can't,
I totally acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this for a second, because the exchange compromise, right? When the exchange compromise happened, the instructions were pretty clear, which is go patch. If the bad guys are in there, these are things you need to do. These are the outcomes that you're looking to avoid from this. And it was clear. This is muddier because this involves every employee in your org. It involves talking to your board, your city council, whatever you have for your organization, to make sure they understand about the new danger, right? So this isn't just, hey, IT, go fix this, or go, close this gap, or go patch this. This is a longer lasting one. So, how do you talk to? We talked about how to talk to employees. How do you talk to the CEO, CFO, CIO, board, city council about this one?
Well, I would just flat out lay out the facts, right? Here's what happened. Here's the potential for what could happen to people personally, and I'd put it into buckets of things like unemployment insurance fraud, right, that would affect people personally. But note that also affects organizations, right? When there's a whole bunch of unemployment insurance impersonation fraud, the organization where the person works does get dinged for that, right? So it's not just straight up personal, but then differentiate that from what could be coming to organizations, which just kind of writ large is going to be an uptick in phishing using well-crafted bait. It's going to be persons reaching out to develop relationship, to initiate relationships, get to know you, things like that are coming from, all manner of places and probably fabricated personalities and things like that. Just put the radar up. And then the other thing, I would also say, start to have a talk with your users who have direct mail coming in from Facebook to them, right, where they have identified themselves to Facebook as a user of your company, I would work to terminate that. I would take action to mitigate that.
One of the things that Mike put together is an executive briefing for folks. So if you're trying to talk to your CEO, your CFO, your city council, whatever, he created something that you can share, and I'll just show it here. It's a Word document, and it's purposely a Word document so you can edit it for your organization, but it explains sort of in layman's terms what happened, what the risk is, and then at the bottom, what are we doing about it? And in red, obviously, you should change this for your organization. Because it's a Word document, the best way to share it with you is with a download link, which I know people hate download links, but it's the best way to share it with you. And that download link is in the chat now. So if that's helpful to you, go ahead and grab that document. Elise, when you work with organizations and you're trying to explain social engineering to the non-IT folks, how do you get there?
Usually I start by talking about something that's relatable for them. So everyone has received a weird text message to their cell phone that says to click on a link or is just a random link. And once people connect that idea to social engineering and scamming, then it becomes a little bit more relevant to them, and then they engage in the conversation. And at that point, we can get into more details about how certain types of phishing emails could lead to them, unknowingly getting ransomware into their network, and clicking on bad things is not the way to go. But typically when I'm talking to people who don't really understand what social engineering is, creating that connection between personal risk and attacks that they themselves have received and witnessed, like the scammy phone calls and things like that, that sets up the conversation really well, because now they understand that it's something that could potentially affect their bottom line and not just the company's bottom line. And now they're engaged in the conversation, and we can talk more specifically about different types of attacks and ways to protect their company network.
Cool. And it occurs to me, if folks want a copy of the deck and the points that Elise had put up earlier, just shoot me an email and I'll PDF that and get it to you. I'll put my email address in the chat there. Just Jake at CI Security. I'm the vain one, so I get the vanity email
Fancy.
address. Yeah. But I also want to, Jason and Ian, both said really important things in the chat here. Jason's, you can create a shortcut on an iPhone from a browser page, delete the Facebook app, and save facebook.com as a shortcut on your home screen. Works almost the same as the app and helps protect you.
Great suggestion.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one before, but it's a good one. And then Ian says, iOS puts a colored dot on your header when the microphone is used, orange, and a green dot for camera access. Check that. Might be another way around. Good suggestions from folks there too. So going back to this actual scraping, have we seen organizations start to use this? Or have we seen criminal gangs start to use this against organizations? Do we know?
You mean the particular data set or the technique that they use to grab the data?
No, the technique, clearly.
Data.
I mean, the actual data set.
There are startups right now that are all about API security. I get like plenty of spam from marketers about API security, and now that I'm saying this to a microphone, I'm probably going to get more. But I mean,
I have Facebook on my phone, so now I'll get served ads. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. It's well, I'll leave it at that. I don't know. What do you think, Elise?
Yes, this is a growing problem. I think it's only going to get worse, to be frank. The more information that is out there, the more people are going to try to access it for free. The more sites implement APIs and make those available to developers, the more, malicious bad actors will try to leverage those APIs for not great purposes. I would say that I've absolutely noticed an uptick in the spam robodial calls over the last month specifically. So while I can't say for certain that that's a direct result of these types of, data scrapes, I would say that it's very likely the case that that's where this data is coming from, because a lot of these did include phone numbers, and my phone number is definitely attached to my primary profiles. So that's something that, phone numbers for cell phones generally aren't published in white pages and stuff like that. So I would say it's probably a direct result of social media data scrapes. And it's important to realize that somebody doing reconnaissance on you specifically could likely find a lot of this information just by perusing your social media pages. So, this information is out there in one way or another. People are going to leverage it if they can get their hands on it.
Yeah, and look, I mentioned I run marketing. I'd be crazy if I didn't say to folks, look, you can hire us and we can show your organization how to do this and we can help defend you. But anyway, that's it for the sales thing, because
Nobody wants to hear that.
Nobody wants to hear salesy things.
No, but I will say to Elite's point, have I been pwned? And other sites like that, you can put your phone number in and see if it's been disclosed this way, and that's probably a good thing to check.
Yeah, it is.
Spoiler alert, it has.
Mine hasn't. Mine hasn't, because I ditched Facebook and now just do the insipid ban thing with.
Yeah. Hey, so 2 comments in the chat here I want to get to. William says, thanks for saving me some writing for my next internal bulletin. It's interesting. Nice. This came up in the Exchange compromise and in ransomware. Those executive communications. If anyone ever needs one, send me an email. We might already have one cooked up for it. People started asking for them, and they're real easy for us to do. So just shoot me an email if you need one on a different subject, or obviously on this one you have the link, or you can ask me for it. Ben says, it seems like apps on phones really have a lot of access, even regardless of settings you make. Would you agree that it's usually better not to install apps in general? Everyone has an app these days. I wonder if many are just there to harvest info. What do you think?
Yes, many are there just to harvest info. In fact, frankly, everyone,
especially
that's
in
free.
The Android marketplace.
Yeah, especially.
Yeah. Given some things I found last week in the news, you can Google that if you're interested. But there were apps that were specifically put into the Google Play Store only to harvest information. So yes, it is a risk, and there are certain applications I will not install on my personal phone, and for that reason, I have separate Android devices that have separate numbers, that have different SIM cards on different accounts, and then I will install things like TikTok, for example, for research purposes on those devices, and not on my own.
Yeah, and also, the whole thing about apps. I mean, some apps are perfectly fine, and a good thing to do, because of all the fakes that show up that are designed just to track you or to slurp information off of you or to hit ad networks in the background all the time. They do this too. When you're going to put an app on your phone, how many people have downloaded it? What do they say? What kind of rating does it get? How long has it existed? Just do a little checking out of this stuff before you install it. And, what you'll find is it's pretty easy to differentiate, the ones that are really crappy, from like the weather app that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, and if you really want to understand what the app is doing, you have to actually read that terms of service that you just accepted, because for example, with Facebook, I mean, they could say that you owe them your firstborn child and nobody would ever know that, because people just accept it. But there's a lot in there that says that they're allowed to do what they're doing. And you've accepted that and given them permission to do it by using the platform.
Yeah, it's, to your point about how muddy this is, Jake, there's a real difference between the risk that is elevated to business, corporations, government from, people using these social media platforms and disclosing too much, and then that information being weaponized against a business, because what we're talking right now is a whole bunch of personal things that people can do to limit the information, that they disclose. Let's just remember, business is at risk because of this. And so internal policies about this are not a bad idea. At the city of Seattle, we really struggled with this stuff. And there was one comment in the chat about, you need to exempt the people that legitimately have to use Facebook to promote the business, right? Right. And there are exceptions to every policy. They do need to identify themselves with an email back to their corporation, their government agency, their whatever. But because of the risk to business, and we're going to see what happens with the data here. I mean, we're just, kind of laying out what the possibilities are. Something is going to happen. Data doesn't go up for sale like this for no reason. People don't buy it for no reason. And whether or not this is going to be turned against individuals, potentially to take advantage of government money that is raining from the sky right now, which is a big possibility, or business to just gain easier entry for, give me your password, I'm going to step in and put ransomware, business email compromise. I'm going to craft messaging that is so believable because it comes from someone you recognize and it references things that you know and have discussed. That's really, probably the number one risk to business right here is just business email compromise and extortion,
And
from
PPP
Facebook
loan
disclosures.
fraud.
Oh,
PPP
yeah.
loan fraud, for example, could be a huge problem for businesses that are legitimately trying to apply and then find out that somebody else has applied in their stead, so to speak.
Yeah, PPP loan fraud and what we talked about, escrow, wire fraud, in home purchasing. I think those are the real pay attention to these from a business perspective.
Absolutely.
So I do want to tell folks, every time we do these events, we ask for folks to fill out a survey. And one, we want to know if these work and if these are helpful to you. So I'm going to put the survey link there. Also, if you fill out the survey, you have a chance to ask for a gift card or donate to a food bank. And for those in the Pacific Northwest, we usually donate to Northwest Harvest, which is a great food bank here. So please fill out the survey. It's over there on the right. It is not a trick link. It is office.com. I feel like I have to say that. Anyway, yeah, I don't know how to give out. How to get
over
people,
the link anyway.
Hover over the link. Don't trust me, but trust me.
Give us your blunt feedback and we'll do something good with it. There you go.
Precisely.
So, I'm also going to put up our contact information here, but let's get last thoughts here. Aleth, yeah, Danny's saying, I don't know, Aleth.
Jake is totally trustworthy.
Jake is totally trustworthy. Trust me, I have a 5 1/4 inch disc. I'm trustworthy. And since Wayne asked earlier, yes, I also have the 3.5. So, so Aleth, final thoughts here.
Did you just sling that floppy out of your holster? There you go. Final thought.
It has my entire Facebook profile.
You backed up your entire profile there. Yep. That's like one video. Final thought. Be mindful of the information that you share online. There's no way that we're ever going to not be dealing with this problem in the future. So the best way to get around the resulting, attacks is to make sure that you are mindful of what people use to build rapport and authenticate with you.
Mike, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go back to what I said, from a business perspective, look for the uptick in attempts to socially engineer through messaging your users, look for contact requests that don't seem to make sense, and counsel your users about using an email address as the contact info for social media. If you do that, you're doing it wrong.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. And obviously we'll see how this plays out. We want everybody to, stay as secure as possible, but please warn everybody in your organization that this is going to pick up. It's Aleth is predicting it, and sadly, when Aleth predicts bad things, they usually come true. So anyway, thank you everybody. Please fill out the survey. If you want either of those documents, either click that link in there or email me, Jake at CI Security. And thank you very much. Have an awesome day, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.